Welcome to the ThinkSpace podcast with myself, John Staskowski, and Danny Massaro. Our goal with this podcast is a simple one. We discuss and dissect a prescient topic, issue, or theme that we think is interesting and might help us humans better understand why we think, feel, and do what we do. If you'd like to engage in these types of conversations too, you can check out thinkspace.academy for a unique cohort-based course that will help you think critically and live authentically. Hope you enjoy the episode. So Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist, author, and most importantly today for what we're going to talk about, Holocaust survivor. And it was 1942 when Frankl and his family were sent to a concentration camp where actually his dad died when he was there. And then in 1944, him and his remaining family were sent to Auschwitz, where his mother and brother both died. And later his wife died in Bergen-Belsen. So in total, Frankl spent 3 years in 4 concentration camps. And the reason we're talking about him today is he's very much part of the existential philosophy area, really. He's really famous for founding what's called logotherapy, which is a school of psychotherapy, essentially, that looks at man's search for meaning as the central motivational force in life. Frankl earned his PhD in philosophy after the war and was eventually awarded a professorship at University of Vienna. And he wrote around 39 books in total over the course of his career. But the most famous probably of those is Man's Search for Meaning, which is what we're going to talk about today. And that's the book that he wrote specifically about his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps. Originally published in 1946, and it became a bestseller in 1959 when it was translated into English.
I came to the book some time ago. I think it was actually you who told me 4 or 5 years ago as I was setting out getting into philosophy a bit more. And you'd said, "Oh, have you read this book, Man's Search for Meaning?" So I'd never heard of it. So I got it, and to my relief, it was only a small book, 150 pages or so. And part of that is a bit of an addition that's been added on about what he did after he came out of the camps, which was he established logotherapy, which is meaning therapy. So yeah, I came to it that way, and it was pretty brutal, really, because it's a book mainly about the experiences of actually living through the horrors of the death camps, really, and all the things that Frankl saw people go through, and how some people survived it, as you know, and why he felt that they managed to keep surviving it, as well as obviously massively luck, and also why, what he noted down and the observations about people who just couldn't take it anymore and couldn't get through it, and sort of they perished. So he got this very fly on the wall view of why people perhaps gave up on life, and why some people, despite everything, managed to keep going. So yeah, it's very hard read in some ways because it's so traumatic and it's so bad. You can't put yourself there. It's easy to think of it as an academic from a distance, but first and foremost, without even us analysing it or anything, it's a book that kind of just hits you at different levels, because in the first place, it's just really shocking.
It's very well written, though, I think, isn't it? It's not clearly the subject matter is brutal.
Yeah.
And I'm not for a minute saying that is enjoyable to read, but as a book, I think it's enjoyably written. The way he writes it's just a nice style of writing, I think he has. That really appeals to me in that book. Even though the topic is brutal, he still makes it accessible. And like a lot of the existentialist philosophy and philosophers, he's not too dense with it, if that makes sense. It's very accessible and it's very practical, I think, in that sense, how he's written the book.
Yeah, well, he's describing what he went through, isn't he? So he's very, in terms of existential, it's very phenomenological. So it's his experience, and I think the book says over 1 million copies sold on it, doesn't it? Which is a lot of people do that with their books, and it doesn't, that speaks for itself in some ways. It doesn't always mean the thing's good, but in this case, it's quite unique. And I think that one of the reasons it has sold so many copies and been passed around is because there is that little bit of it's easy to read. His experiences, but ultimately, I think it was turned into a therapeutic book. It's actually passed around. I would imagine, not just because the history of the Holocaust. If you were into the history of it and finding out facts, I think first and foremost it's pitched as a self-help book, which is kind of controversial, which some people have criticised it for, because like, you can never really make anything positive from that kind of stuff. But Frankl disagreed, and he went on to sort of make this as his pillar book for his future career and the movement of logotherapy, which he took on into his psychotherapy and his treatment, and then his general advice to how one might live a good life, which was basically to find your own meaning in things, no matter what, and then all the different branches of those types of meanings. So you might find three ways he distinguished it was like, you might find creative meaning in your life, you might find like an experiential meaning in your life, sort of, like where you might go traveling, or you like walking and things like that. The creative thing might be more like your hobby, or something that you devise, something that you invent, something that you make unique to you. And then the one that we're most common in a way, the attitudinal meaning, which is, basically, if you're ever thinking to yourself, what's the point? Oh, what's the point? Oh, there's no, and you're going down that route, it's like, snap out of it and change your attitude. Because if you develop, this pretty much existential view about being responsible for your attitude, existence precedes essence, according to Sartre, that basically, no, sort your attitude out, start focusing on the right things, get yourself sorted out, and create some meaning for yourself. So there are three areas he sort of goes on. So he very much puts therapy at the foot of the person who's having the therapy, and basically says, come on, ship shape, sort yourself out. Your only main problem in life is that you're going around depressed, you're going around, feeling worthless and so on. You just need to get some meaning, potentially, in those three areas.
And in that sense, he was and logotherapy, which we'll probably dissect a little bit more. But the interesting thing for me on that about his therapy was it's very future focused.
Yeah,
So if we think back to the, Can We Live in the Moment episode we did, which was that the third one, I
yeah,
think it possibly
yeah.
was.
For now,
That's what we were talking about, weren't we? How there's that push, or just live in the moment, forget the past, don't worry about the future, just be
yeah,
in that moment. I find Frankl quite therapeutic on that sense, that he's like, no, the future is massive. That's what you're living for. That's where the meaning is. It's in the future. And he gives some quite nice examples, or an example of the people who did tend to struggle in the camps. For him, it was like they were trying to escape the present, because obviously in that present moment, there's no way around it. You're in a horrific situation. And their escape, the people that struggled, that he observed, their escape was in the past. So they were thinking about what they
yeah,
had, what they were, what they'd done, and that was their way to escape
yeah,
the horrific situation. But he saw it as that was an error. It was like, no, you needed to have something thinking forward. Yes, that this current moment is bad, but you need something that has meaning for you, that you're aiming towards in the future. And that's why I quite like the. I remember when we first talked about doing an episode on this, and when I first read the book, it must have been 7 or 8, maybe 9 years ago, even now. I didn't like his logotherapy stuff at the time, because it's very much two sections, the book, isn't it? You get
no,
the story of what I'd been through and what I'd observed, and then maybe the last quarter is the logotherapy. And I remember back then thinking, oh, it's too technical, it's too theory based. And again, when I read it this time, totally different perception of it. I was like, no, I quite like this as a therapy, and definitely that future focus appealed to me. Yes, there's meaning. Have that
yeah.
meaning.
I think that's an interesting point, separate to this as well, that you've changed your mind about, no man ever steps in the same river twice.
But I think I've said to you before, I tweeted it the other day, how I tweeted a section from the book, and I said,
Yeah,
it does. It always surprises me how you can read the same book at different periods and points in life and have a totally different experience of what's in there. And there's been a lot of books over the years that's been like that for me.
Well, there's a few things there. That's the beholder's share, isn't it? Firstly, can you understand the words? You know, when I reread it, because I'd. But by the way, it's free on Audible. This book, so I listened to it again. So for anyone listening, if you just go to Audible, you know they're giving it away for free. Yeah, there were words coming up that I was just yeah, I got it because I've just done a 4 years studying a lot of it in different language. So it must have hit me differently this time. But yeah, that's a piece of advice every time, isn't it? I read the other day that it's sometimes better to read the same book twice than to read two or three, four, five different books because you realize that things can like there's the beholder's share. 50% of what you interact with is always you bringing your perceptions to it, and they are often current perceptions. So you can always surprise yourself. And then when you change like that, like you've experienced some change in interpreting the book's usefulness, that probably prompts you to be a bit more open-minded about future books you read, or even revisiting certain things that you might have written off. And that's kind of good as well when you're helping people. I find that in with my coaching ideas and helping people that, yeah, 3 years ago I might have suggested something and they've just totally avoided it. But that doesn't mean that if I suggested it again, they wouldn't necessarily, they might be into it. Or you try a certain coaching idea 1 year, but they're only ready for that idea 4 years down the line. So that stuff can help you. But yeah, interesting you said about one of the things I thought was interesting in the book that stuck out for me was this concept of he was lucky because he got to go to a bit of a work camp. So if you weren't fit enough to go for work, you didn't survive anywhere. They just sent you straight to the chambers. So if you survived that and instead of you were sent left, you went right. Be right was ironically good news because you were going to carry on living. Left, although they didn't know it, meant the gas chambers. So once they got in there, they were obviously fit enough to work. And the critical thing was that those that could keep working and find meaning in the little bits of work that they were doing almost had a reason to get up and avoided the what he called like the Sunday neurosis feeling that he noticed further on in life, which was that feeling that you might get on a Sunday at times. You're not busy, there's nothing to do, and you kind of don't know what to do with yourself. Maybe people don't experience that as much anymore because they can just bury themselves in the phones all day, can't they? But I definitely remember that sort of Sunday feeling as a kid and as growing up of a bit of anxiety and pointlessness because there's nothing to do, whinging a bit and getting a bit, what's the point,
I
and,
think
and so
related
on.
to that, those people as well, he very much part of his observations were that the people who were, let's call them busy in normal
Mm,
life. So, and by that I mean maybe high status jobs, important work that they were doing outside, higher incomes, they've got that kind of standing. He saw them shrink because that was all outside and in there, they couldn't really take any meaning from it, like you say,
yes.
the work and just getting through the day, doing the physical work that they had to do, and just they couldn't do that. Whereas the people who had less of that, I don't know if they did maybe
Yeah.
more menial jobs or
No, but wasn't it that they were more thinkers, that they'd
yeah,
done a bit of reading and thinking outside? So at first they really suffered because it was like, this is horrible, but then managed to start utilizing the brain to kind of use meaning and think their way out, paradigm it and perspective it after the original, shock of it. Whereas the people who felt quite high status outside, they held on to that for a while in the camps, but as soon as that went,
because it's
it was
just
gone.
stripped from you, isn't it? You go in there, it's like we don't care. You,
Yeah,
everyone's wearing the same uniform. Everything, all your possessions, everything's gone. You are just there, and like you said, you're only even there at that point
yeah.
because you're fit enough to work. So there'll have been people who were maybe it's the wrong word, but more worthy perhaps, who were sent the opposite direction just because they were physically less robust.
And obviously this is extreme, and one of the criticisms of the book is it's so extreme that then how can you really go on and take what people were doing in absolutely extreme, what would, none of us know how we would react, sort of thing in that situation. So therefore, how can you go to everydayness of normalized lives and say, oh, I learned something from this real extreme situation, because there must be so much stuff going on, like shock and grief and biological weakness and organism weakness, and what you think about the human race. So there's an unfairness. Like if you've had experiences, in the Arctic or in the SAS, or someone's got stuck out for 2 years on the North Pole, and how can you really use those lessons from there when you're back in everyday life? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But Frankl definitely was like, yeah, the lessons I learned in there, you can definitely benefit from those lessons out here. One of those things was that Sunday neurosis thing, where if you get up and you just think, what's the point? And you haven't got this little bit of, like we were saying about Camus, like you haven't got this pushing your boulder up your hill, no matter how menial, no matter how sort of repetitive or whatever, if you can't find a bit of a buzz in it, and you can't find a reason to be happy despite what's going on, the organism starts to give up, which could be linked to, when people have been married for 60 years and one of them passes away and the other one just gives up. They call it dying of a broken heart, don't they? But you just don't know if there's the organism's like, well, there's no reason to carry on. Now, he said that I can. One of the things that got me, and he said that he'd seen some people get up in the morning in these huts where they all had to share, and basically one or two of them would not move, and they'd look at them and they wouldn't move, and then they'd just sneak down into the pocket, find a hidden cigarette, and start smoking it, knowing that the guards were going to do them in for that because they had to get up and go out. And he said, and we knew that within 2 days they'd die because they'd quit, they'd given up, and they'd gone for the instant pleasure of the cigarette. So, okay, let's presume that's something that really informed Frankl, and it did. That to me reminded me of university years when I was at university, which I know we might be covering nostalgia soon, and as a topic, which is a bit more light-hearted. I did a bit of a Frank Lampard then, didn't I? Putting a joke in a tragic
We
situation.
need to do a Schadenfreude episode too after the way things are going.
Oh yeah. What it reminded me of was, I look back at university sometimes and I have no really fondness for it, and I've often wondered, like, I love my time at college, I love my time when I started work, but these sort of 2 or 3, 4 university sort of years where I went to Liverpool University and basically just got pissed all the time. Didn't learn, wasn't into it. It was all about, worked in some record shops, spending all my money on tunes, going out. Wasn't doing any sport apart from kick about in the park. Now, at the time, it was pleasurable. At the time, you're in that full-on life, but there's no meaning in it for me. So it reminded me of that. It kind of helped me understand a bit. I thought, why do I not look back at that time and really, really have any sort of fondness for it, or any inside myself as much as I have in other situations, such as when I lived by myself at college and was on my own and made it through, and I was quite meaningful for me to do that at a young age, and still provides like some good meaning and confidence. But yeah, and I just thought, I didn't have anything really meaningful going on. I just went for the pleasures. So I gave up on education and learning. I didn't read any books. I know this might be a typical student, but stereotypical young, fresher student or whatever. But no, and since, when I got to work and I started reading and I started getting on back into my squash and I got fit and I started to, want to win matches, and I started like coaching teams, started with girls football and then squash and then doing lectures and trying to get, better job and really improve myself, started doing my NLP courses, and it just went and went. I think in a way, I think that's existentially what's happened to me. Absolutely nowhere near the Holocaust thing. I mean, just meaning that I think I found the ability, or I found the importance of, when I get up in the morning, it's quite important to sort of make meaning out of even the most small, silly things, but also have some bigger things going on, like bigger projects. And I think you don't want that Sunday boredom, what's the point feeling. And I don't think that means you can't chill out. I think chilling out and relaxing and doing nothing, I'm well capable of that, but it doesn't feel meaningless to do that. So I thought that was a good thing about Frankl. He was very much like, I know there's a lot of cliches, but it's like you get out of life what you put in type thing. Action, talk doesn't cook rice. The Chinese, all them sort of action orientated. Get on your bike and come on, let's get yourself. There's always a good place for you if you can
One
create it.
thing you mentioned a little bit there was you kind of referred to people who've been critical of Franco and his maybe interpretations of it, and I do wonder the
Yeah,
extent to which can we understand something like that we've not experienced. So there's no one who can say, well, Frankel's wrong or Frankel doesn't know what he's talking about because that was just his pure lived experience, wasn't it? That he documents in the book, and then his career beyond that was just all informed by that, just helping people. So I don't think anyone can dispute that. You might dispute the writing and the way the book was, maybe examples that he used and stuff, but we can't dispute his experience. But I do find that interesting as a question. Can we ever understand something we've never experienced? We were listening to a Jordan Peterson lecture this week, weren't we? And something he referred to in that reminded me of what we've been talking about here. He refers to kind of inherent in the human condition is we're limited in the face of unlimited complexity. So just this unfolding life ahead of us, there's so much complexity going on, and just life is so complex in and of itself. But part of our human condition is we're limited. We're never going to be able to understand everything, and if
yeah,
not most things. But we have to try and muddle through it because we're limited in that sense. So he
yeah,
talks about he was referring it back to nihilism again, so linking back to another episode we've done, where you get this weird scenario where because we're so limited as humans and the world is so complex, you either get nihilism at one
mm,
end or you get kind of totalitarian rationalism at the other end, and people tend to
yeah,
maybe sway between the two. Whereas Frankel's bang in the middle, isn't he? He's kind of trying, and the
yeah,
existential view is really. But when you mention about can we understand something we've never experienced, so we can read Frankel's book and we can empathize with him, we can put ourselves in those situations through his descriptions. But I've actually been to Auschwitz. I've been because I'm quite fascinated by World War II. So I've been
yeah.
loads of different places around the world that have significance within
Right,
World War II. But obviously, because of my family background, Polish, etc. I've been to Poland a few times, but I did do like a little bit of I wouldn't call it a pilgrimage, but I just went on my own and did a little bit of traveling around Poland, like traveling in other people who've come before me's footsteps. And I did go to Auschwitz, and I tried to do it a bit more authentically, if that's the right word, because it's anyone who goes to Krakow, it's kind of on the tourist trail, isn't it? Right, do a day trip to Auschwitz, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do it
yeah,
very much on my own and make myself uncomfortable. So, because it's probably 2.5, 3 hours from Krakow, the main, like the city,
right,
on a train, but it's like a normal like commuter train. It's kind of going through the back and beyond. It's not, it's like a really old rickety train. I thought, right, I'm going to do it that way. Outside of the touristy bits, no one really has any fondness for English people, so everything's in Polish. They don't really accommodate you that way. So I purposely maybe didn't wasn't doing it purposely at the time, but thinking back, I put myself in like, and just the thing of going into the train station in at the town where Auschwitz is, and then walking up to the camp's about a mile from the train station. So I kind of did it that way to make it a bit more visceral. But it's a weird,
yeah,
and this is the point I'm making, which I'll eventually get to. Is can you understand something you've never experienced? Even being there and walking around and seeing all the stuff that people like Frankl talk about and that you see, and you kind of you grow up with the
mm,
stories. Even then, it doesn't really
mm,
feel that real.
right,
It was a very
mm,
weird vibe at Auschwitz because it's clearly this like brutal place of real significance,
mm,
but there's like a theme park vibe to it. So you go there, but like I said, it's on the tourist trail, so you've got buses turning up, and it
mm,
might be like school buses with kids on a day trip from school, so they're all running about and jolly as kids are. You've got actual tourists where they've got on a bus in Krakow, and
no,
it's like a tourist excursion. So it's like a weird theme park vibe, but then the staff there are really,
mm,
they're straight faced, and it's like you're at and it's like they
right,
kind of ground you a little bit. But I found that strange, just the theme parkiness of it. But I did quite a nice bit around where you have a guide, but you're just wearing a headset,
Mm.
so you don't have to be in earshot of them.
Mm.
So you're walking around kind of roughly on your own, and they're just explaining what you're seeing in some of the buildings.
Right.
And it was a really strange experience because one thing that I took from it was, they're showing you stuff where it's like, right, and this is where that happened, and it's meant to be like impactful, and they're trying to like hit you with this is
Yes.
how brutal this place was. But you can't imagine being there in the moment, even though you try. But the sense I got was like, and this was weird. There's a bird on the front of, and I'm laughing at your wallpaper in your background there. It reminds me of it. There's a bird on the front of Frankel's book. I don't know if it's on the same edition you've got. And that was something I noticed when I was there. It was a beautiful day, hot, really sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and you're walking around and the birds are singing. It's quite green, the areas around it, like trees, and you're walking around, and
Yeah.
yeah, the fences are quite visceral, and some of the you're in what was a prison camp essentially.
No.
But it was in that, and I'm thinking that's what I remember thinking. God, I wonder what that felt like. So a bird would fly in, land on a branch next to you, and it's just pecking out, and then maybe it just flies off
Yeah.
over the fence, and it's flitting in and out, whereas you're stuck in there. And
Yeah.
I had a real sense of nature just does not give a shit.
Mm.
What this is men doing stuff to a man doing this to itself, like all these
Mm.
fences and brutal things that were going on, that doesn't happen in nature. It was man-made, like, and the birds didn't really. The bird's just been a bird, isn't it, flying around and
Wasn't there that line in it? That it's the famous line, isn't it? That this was a place where man invented the gas chamber, but man also walked into the gas chambers with,
kind of head held high,
sing
wasn't it?
saying a prayer, saying the
Yeah,
Jewish prayer. Like that's one end of the. Man can do this and man can do that. It can be,
it
so
was
much.
bizarre in that sense, though, that you're looking at all this man-made, constructed evil, like the barbed wire and everything, and all this the ridiculous stuff that they did to each other there.
So I've asked a question. Did you obviously you've got a few sort of connections in some strange sort of connected way in yourself a bit. Did you get any meaning from that trip in any
Definitely
way?
just understanding, because my Polish grandparents on my dad's side, my granddad, his dad was German. They lived over the kind of the German side of the country near the border.
Yeah.
But granddad was Polish. He was conscripted into the German army, like forced into the
Mm.
German army to fight for the Germans at that point, escape. And then my grandma she lived in a little town near Krakow.
Mm.
And they met up and escaped. And they had like a really
Mm.
mad story. Like my mum always said, you should write a book about this one day. But I
Right.
could always tell as a kid with my gran, she would. There were certain days she would want to tell you stuff, and it was just in the moment.
Yeah.
She felt like telling you, and there's others you could just tell. You'd maybe ask her something, and she just didn't want to go near it. But yeah, I maybe do regret that a little bit. I could have maybe
Yeah.
got more of their story down. And
When you came away from it, did it give you any sort of, I don't know, like Heidegger talks a lot about your legacy, and we're very much through time, and as you get older, sometimes you start to appreciate your legacy, and you're almost like there's a bit of responsibility sometimes, or debt to the past. You get any of that? You've got to take that on to make a heritage of yourself or something. Frankl talks about that.
yeah, I don't know if it was there was definitely a thing of going back and just being more appreciative of
Yeah,
where they've come from and that the journey that.
they deserve that at
Yeah,
least.
and just kind of like I said, walking in their footsteps a little bit was quite nice. That and
Yeah.
because I wanted to purposely go on my own, I didn't want it to be like a holiday. And
Yeah, I think I sometimes watch these shows, the Who Do You Think You Are, and they go back generations, and I just think, gosh, they're very emotionally affected. Things go on like that, don't they? Your meaning can come through your heritage and your line, and obviously that must be linked to your children and going forward. And I know Frankl in the book, he talks a lot about that, doesn't he? About not knowing whether his wife was alive or not, and then one of his key things was it was kind of irrelevant that if she was alive or she hadn't been, because it got for him just a state of my meaning is love will conquer hate. So every day I keep going, I'm like I'm on the side of love. That almost became his attitude in the end when he had absolutely nothing left. Type. I mean, one of the interesting criticisms I read on it, you say criticism, don't you? But then it don't mean they're criticizing the man. They're just the psychotherapists were looking at logotherapy, and saying, is it all that? Like, okay, I get it. You went through that experience. Don't deny that. You've done an unbelievable thing, Frankl. You've invented logotherapy, meaning therapy. It's helped so many people. But would it help everybody in this hospital as the only treatment? And I think that it's sold a little bit. One of them said that it became a bit religious, a bit more theology rather than psychotherapy. In almost like it sort of got to a point where it was like it said everybody has to create their own meaning and find their own meaning, and you're living your own life, and every meaning's relative to you. So it was highly relative. It wasn't just as this is the meaning of life, do this, but in a way it was religious because meaning became the religion. It became just we see now, like find your purpose, find your meaning, and that can be taken on too much, and it becomes almost theology. It was religious, where some of the people sort of said, what it does do, it denies the present pain. It does deny. So if you happen to be a forward-thinking, futuristic type being, that really into that, then it might work for you. But for some people who are actually in the shit right now, you know what I mean, in the depths for whatever reasons, psychologically, it's not as simple as just going in there and going, by the way, have you? I know what's wrong with you. You've nothing to live for. Just find something to live for, and I'll see you next week.
But this is what I'm saying around understanding what you can't experience. So even though I went to Auschwitz, and there was even really visceral bits where they had these kind of what would have been like cubic, and they're like standing cells. So they were like really small. Imagine like a shower cubicle built out of breeze blocks, and it was like no kind of lid on it, but just sides. And it was like these were like the standing punishment. And you stood in there and you'd think you could fit 4 blokes in
Yeah,
there. Let's call it. Without it being, it would be tight, but it wouldn't be. And it'd be like, yeah, there'd be 20 people stood in here. That was the punishment. So even that, you were physically and you,
yeah,
you could almost like viscerally feel what it would have felt like because you're standing in the same bit. But even that, I still don't. I could just walk out. It's not the same, and that's what I was kind of hinting at. I saw something actually the other day. You'd have
yeah,
quite liked it. It was about
yeah.
virtual reality. I think it was on like a BBC breakfast program, and this company had started with these VR headsets, and
Okay.
essentially what they were trying to create was the late 1980s like rave culture. Like the
Oh,
original. Did you see it?
yeah. I saw it. It looked
Right,
brilliant. Yeah,
didn't
they
it?
were.
And it was like the people were
Yeah,
buzzing. It was like, it was like, and I did think, I wonder if something like that. So they've got these VR headsets, and it was like you went right to the start of like even in the car and trying to find this field in the middle of
yeah,
nowhere and
yeah,
find a phone box to ring the guy who had the coordinates on the map for where this rave was going to be. And then they went through and they did the actual rave and stuff, and they were buzzing off it. People who were there back in the day, so it obviously felt quite real to them.
yeah,
Now, this is a bit of a darker use of that, but I wonder if something like that would help with things like meaning. So, if you're someone who's in the modern day struggling, like you say, someone like Frankl would just say, "Well, you just need to
mm,
find some meaning. Just do this," and it's the negative aspect of it. Maybe if
yeah,
there is a way that you could almost put a virtual reality
yeah,
headset on someone so that they could feel physically and mentally what it was like
yeah.
to be in a concentration camp.
I don't think it takes, that. I mean, obviously, with the rave thing, they were revisiting a memory that they'd already physically
But
had.
they had, if you remember, they had people who'd never lived through those times. And they were like, they were.
Oh right, yeah. So maybe it'd be a different feeling if if it brought back feelings rather than created brand new ones. Yeah, I think one of the things Frankel said was try and live your life as if you were leading it the second time around. It's a little bit on the Nietzsche's more fatty thing. Have no regrets and so on. Live as if eternal fate. For you'd live this life forever and ever and ever perpetually. So make your decisions based on the fact you're going to repeat this and repeat it. So he said, try and live as if you're living the second time round, having learned the mistakes of the first time. So in a way, that's that with a virtual reality there. I suppose you're playing with time a little bit, and that would give you an opportunity to perhaps live an alternate scenario and think, oh, I don't want that. I think you're getting that, aren't you? I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Really, it's a bit weird. It was a bit weird listening to it last week. I was glad to get through it. Really, the camps parks. It's pretty depressing, but obviously meaningful. With the Ukraine situation. So whatever the politics are, whichever way you are, some of the things that have started to kick off there are happening. That are happening now. That I found myself being a bit like, well, there's worse things going on in life. If I have a bad morning or one of the players loses a match or Everton lose again, no, but you know what I mean. You jump from like you find out you kind of quickly. I don't know. You still feel that little pettiness, that petty. I think because it's meaningful to you, isn't it? Oh, I want my sports team to win. Oh, I want my player to win. I want to have a good meal, not a burnt meal. I can't believe, I want the weather to be nice. It's blooming raining again. I can't believe it. It's not fair. We should be having that. We've had some sun. We should have more sun. Or I've booked a holiday and I've gone away and it's raining. Typical. Can't. But yeah, you know what I mean. You're watching the news and it's like way, way, way like more deep and serious. But so even though you kind of know that, you're still petty and you're still in your own life making up, and that's something about you kind of you can use perspectives and things, but you've really got to be some kind of. I think this was what logotherapy was a bit criticised for as well. That if you're not a spiritual person who can do big picture all the time, it's quite hard. Logotherapy seems cold for the less spiritual because it's like, look, mate, I know you're telling me to get meaning, but my kids can't eat. This has gone this, and I am a failure. Shut up, and I've had to learn that as a coach, as a bit of a therapist, and so on. There are people who aren't ready for it. They don't want you to come in and make them find meaning and things like that. They don't necessarily. They just and this was the thing about some of the people who died. Frankl was a bit criticised as well for towards the end trying to keep people alive who wanted to die. And they were like, you should have just let them die because that was their way out. That was their right. That was their peace. You got a bit wrapped up on, I get it, for your own survival and your own sake. You found meaning in the
Well, it was meaning
of
in the suffering, wasn't it?
Yeah, meaning in the suffering so you got out of it, but then sort of preached it to everybody. But that wasn't mean that you're a bad person because you helped a lot of people. But there were certain people who didn't want you to be didn't want to be preached at. Thank you very much. You were kind of just going for more of your own like convictions that what you were saying was absolutely brilliant, and I get it. It was fulfilling for you, and your intentions were to help, but you didn't realize one of the unintended consequences of telling everybody they just needed meaning all the time was you actually demeaning their pain and suffering. And I think that's what I've learned. I know, take that to a silly scale. Sometimes I'm a bit of a pragmatist. I'm a fixer. I try and move on. Come on, let's get on with it. Life's too short. Come on, positive. I think over the years I have got a little bit better at like when people have a bad time, just leaving them with it a little bit and not just diving in with a oh, I know, we'll turn this shit into gold. Just think of it like this. Sometimes that's not what some people can handle or need, and it comes across as and that's what I particularly was getting at in my PhD. All this stuff about well-being and all this stuff about growth mindset, and resilience training. It's like sometimes don't deprive people of the struggle straight away. Who do you think you are to take somebody else's pain away all the time? This is a bit of a flip side to making meaning out of things, different attitude, get creative, have a reason to live, go back into your past, think of your future, buzz off your projects, find things to do. Yeah, it's another way that you might combat the ambiguity of your existence. But a bit like in the nihilist episode we did and with the absurdity, there are other ways to look at the world, another world. And who's to say pleasure is Freud was all about will to pleasure. So who's to say, going for pleasures? Who's to say that people are listening to this and going, well, I was at university. I just had so much pleasure. I never stopped thinking about it. It was the best days of my life. Who's to say that, not having meaning and just diving in for loads of good times is hedonists would be more like that, wouldn't they? So that's what I'll just put in a caveat. Yeah, a million copies sold, and I think that because it's so serious and it's so brutally hard to understand the Holocaust stuff, it is. Even now, I feel a bit of an idiot criticizing it because you're almost not allowed to, are you? Because it's so raw and bad. But I'm not criticizing his what he said he went through, and I'm not criticizing his. I'm just saying there's limits to the logotherapy ideas of all you need is meaning and everything will
I
be
think
fine.
that's probably a tough one for a lot of people because he does almost reduce it to that where the focus on the future is a key part of it, and then it's like, well, if I can't even envisage anything in the future. If you're in a particularly bad set of circumstances, it is a kind of a little bit of a get out to then just say, yeah, well, then just find meaning in the suffering. To suffer, he's very clear that you don't. Suffering
Yeah,
isn't necessary to find meaning or to have meaning, but he is kind of saying that you can still find
no,
meaning in suffering. So even in the worst of circumstances, yeah, if you can't
yeah,
envisage a future or blah 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 blah, just find meaning in the suffering, and that is kind of almost your duty. He is kind of like, he does see it a little bit as a get out of jail, doesn't he? The people who just think, yeah, that's not for me.
yeah. I think just on that though, I think the suffering bit you do see a lot, don't you? Know where people have had tragic circumstances. So, look at the mind, Musk MND, with the Rob Burrow
Yeah,
and Kevin Sinfield, for example. You got you see how charity and projects and they do lots of things to remember people. And I can completely imagine myself leaning on this, that like something tragic happens and just having to do it, the charity for 40 years because there'd have to be a point to that person's existence. I can see where it's so good and so powerful, but again, I think that would be down to the individual because I think that the other people will cope with that in a different way,
mm.
and they wouldn't need to feel the need to go and make massive meaning out of things. But you know what I mean? I think it depends. It just gets down to the individual at that time. How much suffering are they actually suffering, and what are they capable of? I also think there isn't really a separation between the mind and the body. It's as if you're just one. And with your bioenergetic stuff, sometimes you're an organism, and if your physiology is gone under big time, the mind can't function straight anyway. And we all have different propensities to be able to, even off sleep, and sleep deprivation or food or starvation. There's chemical things going on in the organism, isn't there, in the cellular level that if
Yeah.
you just sort of there's no you might consciously want to think things are meaningful, but you hear people that have got depressed or felt like committing suicide and things like that, or and they've got like loads of good things in their life, loads of things to live for, and they've just still done it. And there are chemical explanations for that. So there's a mind and body separateness that I don't think Frankl, he doesn't bring the biological element into it. Yeah, and then the existentialists don't do that, and that's what Sartre was criticised for a lot. I think Simone de Beauvoir was a bit better; she understood that a bit more. But Sartre was very much like, no, you're responsible for your life. Everything you do, if you don't do it authentically, is rubbish. You're living in bad faith if you do anything else. And get sort it out and get to grips with your situation, or else. And I think that although I am like that with lots of things, I still think that there's some people are genuinely like ill and suffering biologically as well as
Well,
mentally.
on that biological level, I always remember in the book he talks about, they get such little rations food wise, and the very little bread that they got. He comments on the people who would just eat it in one go, and then the people who would like keep it and just nibble on a little bit, every few hours, and kind of delayed the gratification even of
Yeah,
that little tiny bit of pleasure that they had. But everything biologically must have been just screaming
yeah,
for energy and nutrition and what you need. So imagine the willpower in. You've actually got a bit of food in your hand. Your body's demanding some kind of sustenance, and you still override it because though I'm going to delay that because it gives me a
yeah,
bit of meaning to my afternoon. So if I just got to get through the morning, and then on the
yeah,
afternoon I've got my bread in my pocket that I can have. So that definitely struck me about that biologically.
yeah. I also think that, like, we've said it before with some of these books where, like the people who win the gold medal, the people who do well, the people who get to the top, they write the books, don't they? And the ones that do all, the autobiographies because they're famous, and you want to know, how did Tiger Woods do that? How did, Serena Williams do that? Michael Phelps. So you read all the training and everything that they did, but you don't read the books of all the people that did all the same stuff and came 50th. You don't, you only get, you don't get like podcasts we've been invited on with people and psychologists who go, yeah, I've helped this person, I do this, I do that. You don't hear about all the people they work with, and it didn't work. Same intention, same process, same help. They don't get publicised or marketed. Doing that bread idea there, saving a bit. I bet there could have been loads of people who tried all them strategies and still went under. There could have been people who was really had a lot of meaning and still just couldn't cope. That's what's, I suppose that's hard for someone when you're trying to get a movement started and you're trying to. It's hard to put the caveats in there. I suppose you've got to sell it as quite a convincing way through. That's part maybe of the therapy. And I know Carl Rogers, who's one of the all-time best ever therapists, who started person-centered counselling and really the start of coaching in the true sense of the word coaching. This concept of draw it out from them, don't add information in, draw everything out. Not in a Freudian way, but much more in a conversational way, rather than the sort of couch dream thing, subconscious stuff. He said Frankl was, his favourite and the best guy ever, in terms of what he got going. You know what I mean? It's just like we were saying with the spiritual stuff. If it's helping and it's a good thing and it floats your boat and it gets you going, who can criticize it? But as a one-size-fits-all approach answer, all you need is meaning. I think there are criticisms in it, but personally, I mainly agree with it.
Well, yeah, another thing that I really liked about the logotherapy, reading it back again, was he is very counter the common typical view of mental disease, isn't he? So everything, if you're depressed, take these pills, like you just said, the psychoanalysis, lie down on the couch, that he's kind of anti that. He's very much that,
Yeah,
despair and feeling a little bit down now and again, and the normal ups
yeah,
and downs of life, that is not a mental disease. And it's actually quite normal to feel like that a lot of the
yeah,
time. So
yeah,
he goes against the grain in that sense. A big thing that that resonated with me as well around that, he's kind of saying that the modern day human, and this was a few years ago now that he was saying this, but it's probably even more prescient now, that we've lacked, or we don't really have any instinct anymore, and we don't really have any tradition anymore either. So you've got people in this that they're just feeling this tension that they don't really know what they should be doing. They don't know how they should be living, like I say, because the instinct's gone and the tradition's gone. So you're in this like no man's land. So
yeah,
he said that, well, that tension, that's
yeah,
normal, and actually that's a part of good mental health, is
yeah,
feeling that tension and almost using that to your advantage rather than seeing it as a pathology and something
yes,
we need to treat and call it a neurosis and give it a name and
yes,
then give it some medication. And maybe
yes.
that's why he got a little bit of criticism as well.
Well, no, I mean, that's why I always like Simone de Beauvoir more, because she talked about the ambiguities of like you're a subject and you're an object in the world. The world's acting on you, and you're acting on the world. So you've got to create meaning and do things and interpret and get off your arse and and find things that make you tick, right? And you got to do that every day and and that means even seeing the wonderment in life at times. Go and see the beauty. Start to notice things, start to get your perspectives and your perceptions better, right, on an individual level. Saying that, the world is still acting on you as well, so there's still things coming your way that are out of your control. Going back and forward between that, between those poles, like the Sartre thing of as well, of you are who you are and you are who you aren't yet. We say it every time. People are constantly fixated with the future, going, when am I going to get this? When am I going to get that? When will this happen for me? Well, that's just how it is. So get on with it. But then if you do too much of that and get stuck at that end and getting on with things, you do miss out. You miss the ability to notice what's good now. That's just one. yeah, you're an individual and you're part of a group. You can be very individual, but yeah, you are part of your family, you are part of a society, and you need people. So all these things again, you've got to try and make sense of the tension between those, and that's it. You're not supposed to be in some constant state of blissed out, like lack of confusion. And I think when you're taking antidepressants, and the easy thing is, oh, I feel a bit hollow, I feel a bit empty, I'm not so sure what I'm doing, I don't know what's happened, I've nothing to get going for, and I've tried everything. People say tried everything, and they haven't tried everything. They've tried a few things for a short space of time, and then they get on a treadmill of drinking too much, of instant pleasures, eating too much, coming up with excuses why they can't exercise, noticing things that aren't good, probably dragging up stories from the past about why it's difficult. Basically being biased and starting to predict stuck states and things that aren't going to go well, practically probably getting into more debt and not being, buzzing at work, not everything not going well. Then in a way that's like you've dived out, you've opted out. And it gets to a point where it's too much and you probably do need pills and drugs. But what you've got a chance as a human to sort of see down the road. You've got a chance to say, if I don't make my bed today, it might not mean anything, and I just leave my bed. I haven't made it, right? And I don't brush my teeth, and I don't do the pots before I leave the house, and I just leave it till later. If I start those habits now, in 5 months, it's only a small thing now, but it'll be a big thing. Once that crumbles, once I stop making my bed, the next thing you know, and I'm not ironing my shirts, the next thing you know, I'm not paying my gas bill on time. The next thing you know, my car's a disgrace. I don't want anyone to come in it because it's constantly messy. The next thing is my relationships are cracking. The next thing is I hate my job, and the next thing is I'm depressed. I think Frankl was getting at a lot of that. I think he was getting find meaning in tiny little things and in some of the bigger things, and you can go a long way to keeping your mind like on track because life's
How
tough.
do you think? So Frankl actually quotes Nietzsche in the book, doesn't he? So Nietzsche's quote: "He who has any why, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." That is almost like Frankl's thesis boiled down, isn't it? It's like even in the worst circumstances, you've still got a choice of
Yeah,
attitude. So how you actually react to those circumstances, you still
yeah,
choose that. And for him, that freedom, so the freedom to choose is essentially what makes us human beings. That's the one thing you can never have taken from you. And I
yeah,
wondered, remember I sent you that like a motivational video of that American bishop, TDJ, and he's giving it, until all hell breaks loose. You don't know.
yes,
You don't know what you've got until all hell breaks loose. You don't know what you can take until the pressure is applied to your life. You don't know what you can endure until people stab you in the back and walk away from you. You don't know how much courage you have until you've been under fire and under struggle and under tribulation. You can't learn what's in you sitting back in a lazy boy chair hitting the remote control watching HBO and Cinemax. But when all hell breaks loose, that's when you get to see what you got.
So we can sit here and theorize and imagine and just think about it. But I wondered what's your gut instinct on how you think you would deal with something like that. So whether it's, putting yourself in Frankl's shoes, so someone knocks on your door now, chucks you in the back of a van, and then next minute you're in a prison.
yeah. I think I go to pieces pretty rapidly. I think I'd be too soft, and I genuinely think that I'd be so upset, I'd be useless. But if I could get through that bit, I think that's when I would begin to rationalize it, and reorientate myself. There's no way, do you know what I mean? I think I might be able to do
Because
that.
I would say you're someone who has a lot of meaning in life. So, from Frankl's perspective,
Yeah, but it's fragile, isn't it? Really, everything's fragile. You're going along, and unless you've come through some really really tough experiences, I think we're all very fragile. Especially, what have we been through? Really, there's things we know about. We've had the probably cushionest of lives ever, and in some ways, I think we are very 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 fragile. And there's probably not many people, of our age that have, been fired off to war or sent to prison, or, you know what I mean? And all this stuff of, in our kind of friends we know and stuff. So, yeah, I think that you've got to, you're in, when you're actually put into a live situation, it's completely different.
And that's what I mean. I was maybe thinking, could VR play a role in that? But how can anyone say, oh yeah, this is the meaning that I have in life and this is my purpose? But can you ever truly know that until you've been in that, where it is a situation of life and death? It's you're in the depths of pain and like suffering and stuff. Can you ever truly know meaning? We can all think we might, but can you until you've been in, say, a Frankl type situation? So that's what I meant by, well, you can criticize him as an author and criticize his theories and stuff, but you can't criticize his experience, because that's it. That's what he took from that experience. So how can anyone, Jordan Peterson I was talking about, until you've lived the experience, you can't possibly know it, can you?
No, and that's phenomenology, isn't it? That's the crux of what I was doing really in my research on how one might live well through a sporting life. Go, then you talk to people who've done it, and you leave it at that. You don't interpret it. You just go, that's what they said, and then you take from it what you will. I think what it helps you with is empathy, and I think as a teacher, as a therapist, as a person, as a human, you don't go diving in with your assumptions as much. So although I think that people have been lazy or they've been stuck, and I think, they could have sorted that out, the reason that they're in that mess, they could have fixed that back when they were 18, and the decisions they made back there has caused this. But again, you weren't in that person's life, were you? You weren't that organism. You weren't that person. Not only have you not walked in their shoes, you never been them in their shoes. Even if you could walk in their shoes, you're still you walking in their shoes. You're not them walking in their shoes, kind of thing. That's another layer. So yeah, I think that helps you as stops you getting frustrated with family members, stops you get pissed off at other people so quickly. You've got more chance of, before you judge them and go flying in with your solutions and your sort of 10-bit pot wisdom and bloody solutions to all the problems. You kind of like try and see that individual situation. I do that a lot with sports parents. I'm always, I wrote a book about how you help parents in sport, and the general vibe is bloody parents are a nightmare, reliving their youth and all that stuff. And it's just like a general line. You can't, you can't just say that. You've never been that parent with that particular child in that sport, in that situation, in their life. That's a really good starting place. So yeah, you read this book, Man's Search for Meaning, and I'd recommend you just read it and almost take it in as a story, and don't try and analyze it or anything. And then when it does the logotherapy bit at the end, if you're a therapist or if you're a coach or if you're interested in self-improvement, maybe have a play around with some of the logotherapy ideas. And so overall, out of 10, John, what would you give it?
I would give it's a solid 8 for me. It is, and it's an easy read for people, and obviously not subject matter wise, but quite a short book. Like I said, it's well written.
Yeah.
It's not dense philosophy and real like hardcore, like Heidegger and some of the people that you drop in now and again. That's tough reading. Whereas this, I think, just an everyday man on the street, woman on the street can just pick it up and take some like really useful meaning from it, can't they?
Definitely, yeah. I'd definitely recommend it. I'd give it an 8.5.
Why don't you buy a copy and give it to Frank? I reckon he's struggling a bit at the minute for some meaning.